Hey, welcome back to Christmas with Karl. My name is Daniel Rogers, and you're on episode number 13, which means that this video marks the halfway point of our Advent series. 26 days of Advent, 25 days of Advent, and then Christmas. And then, so 26 videos in total. I want to just give a quick advertisement for my friend Greg, who is right now publishing a daily series on a Substack called Life in the City, in which he goes through a different historical character in sort of the flow of church history to talk about Advent from that particular person or person's life, depending on, I don't exactly know what he's going to be doing because I'm filming this before he actually starts publishing his stuff. But you should go look at his series, Life in the City, on Substack, and read his Advent series. He's posted it the last 4 years now or so. It's very, very good. Okay, right now we're talking about how the incarnation of Christ in the Christmas story brings about grace, but it also brings about judgment. In the very last video, we read this comment, in that, or rather, grace is imparted to it, but this cannot happen without its coming under judgment as well. Grace, he says, does not come except through the straight gate and along the narrow way of judgment. It is from this standpoint that it must be understood in the of a virgin. So, in Jesus being born of a virgin, he says, there is a judgment upon mankind. What is that judgment? Well, he says, when Mary as a virgin becomes the mother of the Lord, and so, as it were, the entrance gate of divine revelation into the world of man, it is declared that in any other way, in other words, by the natural way in which a human wife becomes a mother, there can be no motherhood of the Lord, and no such entrance gate of revelation into our world. So, by the fact that Mary was a virgin whenever she birthed Jesus, God is basically saying, in effect, man is unable to bring about his own salvation apart from a supernatural element, right? That we cannot win God back over or justify ourselves, as he talked about on one of the very first pages. Remember that stunning quote from page 172? He says, if we've never experienced forgiveness, he says, we will definitely regard ourselves as someone with the power to justify themselves, right? Unless you experience divine grace, you won't realize the judgment that you are not able to procure grace for yourself. Otherwise, it would no longer be grace, right? And so Jesus being born of a virgin is a divine judgment, because it's saying, human beings, you are stuck, you're messed up, and the only way you're going to get out of this is if I step into human history, myself, in the flesh, and rescue you. So, Bart goes on to say that mankind, that the physical procreation cannot be the workmate of God in this instance. If it actually becomes so, it is not because of any attributes which it possessed already and in itself, but because of what is done to it by the divine word. And so not because of what it has to do or give, but because of what it has to suffer and receive, and at the hand of God. So he's saying that man's salvation, man's reconciliation, cannot come from anything that man has within himself. It cannot come from anything that is inherent within humankind, because of the depth of the depravity, is his argument that he's making, right? And so here, if we do become co-creators with God or co-participants with God, as we talked about in the last video, it's not something like within us it's making that happen, but rather it's something that God is doing to and for us by grace. Yet this is a kind of judgment, he says. So the virginity of Mary within the birth of the Lord is the denial, not of man in the presence of God, he says, but of any power, attribute, or capacity in him for God. So it's not that the miraculous birth of Jesus is saying, you're not able to bring this about yourself, and also you're so far beneath me and horrible, and you can't even be my presence. Well, no, Jesus' birth is Emmanuel. It is God with us, right? And so instead what it's saying is, God with us is a gift of God, by God, through God, that is done for us as well as to us. It's really, really amazing. He says, if he has this power, and Mary clearly has it, it means strictly and exclusively that he acquires it, that it is laid upon him. That is Mary's ability to say yes, for the angel to be able to say, behold, the handmaiden of the Lord. That is something that comes from God by his agency, that we're able to even to say that. And so the meaning of this judgment, what this means, this negation of our participation in the scheme of redemption, is not the difference between God and God as creator and man as creature. That is, it's not as if this has always been the case, like that man has always been unable to be partners with God. He says instead, man as a creature, if we try for a moment to speak of man in this abstract way, might have the capacity of God, for God, and even be able to understand himself in this capacity. In paradise, he says, there would have been no need for this sign, born of a virgin, to indicate that man was God's fellow worker. But the man whom Revelation reaches, and who is reconciled to God in Revelation and by it, is not man in paradise. That is, we fell from our inherent creaturely status in which we had the capacity to be co-creators and co-partners with God in paradise, in the garden, he says. And because of that, Revelation meets us in this fallen state. Revelation meets us in our delusion and death and depravity. And so he says that man has not ceased to be God's creature, but he's lost his pure creatureliness, and with it the capacity for God, because as a creature and in the totality of his creatureliness, he becomes disobedient to his creator. To the roots of his being, he lives in this disobedience. It is with this disobedient creature that God has to do in his revelation. This is beautiful, because he's saying, from Karl Barth's perspective, remember Karl Barth's a Reformed theologian, he's like, yes, just totally fallen. And yet it's not as if God is going, ew, get away, get away, get away. It's that, no, God, like a potter with clay, is working through Israel's history, breaking the pot and reforming it, breaking the pot and reforming it, until finally just the time comes for Jesus to show up. And it's not with perfect human beings that Jesus is revealed, that Jesus has a relationship with and is revealed to, but Jesus meets us at our most disobedient. When we put Jesus on the cross, he says, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And that's when God meets us. That's the miracle of Christmas. And that is just as confounding, just as mysterious, just as mind-boggling as the idea that God could be human, and that Jesus could be, as we sometimes say, 100% man and 100% God, even though those aren't even mathematical terms that we're talking about. They sound like mathematical terms, just like the Trinity being 3 and 1 sounds like mathematical terms, but it's not a math problem. It is the best we can do with language to describe the ineffable mystery that God is with us. This is amazing. And so he says, in his nature, his flesh, that the word assumes in being made flesh, like that's where he meets us. And it's not anthropos, it's sarx. And this human nature, he says, the only one we know, and the only one there actually is, has of itself no capacity for being adopted by God's word into unity with himself, that is, into personal unity with God. Upon this human nature, a mystery must be wrought in order that this may be made possible. And this mystery must consist in its receiving the capacity for God, which it does not possess. And this mystery is signified by Jesus being born of a virgin. Man, wow. So the virgin birth is showing us that difference between us and God, that judgment, that we're unable to approach God on our own, like we are completely just naked, as we see in Genesis chapter 3. And any attempt that we make to cover our nakedness, whether it's fig leaves or leather clothes or whatever, still doesn't get us fully into the presence of God. He says, this is the gap that God crosses through the incarnation to enter into our fallen nature, to transform it from the inside out, and to bring us into his presence through these co-processes of revelation and reconciliation. Man, good stuff. At least I think it's pretty good stuff. And even though I don't know, there's some things about Barth's language that I have just little bitty, little bitty differences with. I still think that the trajectory of the whole thing and the feel of the whole thing is marvelous. And there's some deep kind of truth in here. Okay, we'll hop into page 189 in the next video. Have a great day. God bless.